Hey, time travelers. Tonight we're diving deep, way deeper than pyramids, pharaohs, or knights in shining armor. We're rewinding human history all the way to the very beginning, to a world without metal, without writing, without civilization. Just stone tools, raw survival, and millions of years of adaptation before empires rose. Before kings ruled, humans were already here, fighting, evolving, thriving against extinction, from scavenging meat off dead lions to shaping obsidian, blades sharper than surgical steel. This is the full, brutal saga of the Stone Age. So grab a torch. It's gonna get wild, raw, and way more human than you expect. Let's find out how we survived 3 million years. Before metal ever existed, you're holding humanity's first murder weapon. It doesn't look like much, a jagged piece of volcanic rock, roughly the size of your palm, with edges sharp enough to slice through flesh and bone. This is a hand axe from Aldove Gorge, Tanzania, crafted 26 million years ago by fingers that weren't quite human yet. But here's what will disturb you. Archaeologists have found these tools buried alongside cracked skulls, the fracture patterns matching the stone edges perfectly. Your ancestor, let's call them Homo habilis, didn't just use this tool to butcher animals. They used it on each other. The evidence is undeniable. Cut marks on ancient human bones. Defensive. Wounds on forearms and skulls split open not for food, but for something darker. Violence wasn't a byproduct of civilization. It was the foundation. The Olduvai Gorge spans 30 miles across the East African Rift Valley, and every layer of sediment tells the same story. Tool-making and murder evolved together, hand in hand, across millions of years. The very thing that made us human, our ability to shape stone into instruments, also made us the deadliest species on Earth. Before we learned to grow food, build shelters, or even speak in complex sentences, we perfected the art of killing our own kind. You're standing at the birthplace of technology, but also at the birthplace of premeditated violence. The hand axe in your grip isn't just a tool. It's the moment our species chose a path that would define us forever. We became tool makers and killers in the same breath, and we've never looked back. But this was just the beginning. As you'll discover, the Stone Age wasn't the time of primitive simplicity. It was 3 million years of humanity's most twisted innovations, where survival required choices that would haunt our species forever. What happened next would make this first murder weapon look almost innocent. You're crawling through the Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones in northern Spain, where 430,000 years ago, your ancestors practiced something so disturbing that modern archaeologists initially refused to believe the evidence. The cave floor is carpeted with the remains of at least 28 early humans. But these aren't burial sites. These are the leftovers of systematic cannibalism. The bones tell a story that chills forensic experts to this core. Cut marks slice across. Femurs where meat was stripped away. Skulls show impact fractures from stone hammers, cracked open to extract the brain. Long bones are split lengthwise to reach the marrow inside. This wasn't survival cannibalism during a famine. This was routine. The Homo heidelbergensis who lived here made eating their own kind a regular part of life. Dr. Jose Maria Bermudez de Castro, who excavated the site, found something even more disturbing. The cannibalized remains show no signs of ritual or ceremony, no careful arrangement, no grave goods, no reverence for the dead. The bodies were processed like any other food source, butchered with the same efficiency used on deer or horses. They ate their neighbors, their families, their children, and they did it with clinical precision. The evidence spans thousands of years, layer after layer of human remains bearing the same gruesome cut marks. This wasn't an isolated incident of desperation. It was a cultural tradition passed down through generations. Children learned to dismember adults. Parents taught their offspring which bones held the richest marrow. Cannibalism became as normal as gathering berries or hunting mammoths. You're holding a 400,000-year-old human skull, its crown smashed open with deliberate intent. Inside your mind, you can almost hear the wet crack of stone against bone. See the hands reaching inside to scoop out the brain matter. This cave holds 28 victims that we know of, but how many more lie undiscovered in the depths? The question that haunts archaeologists isn't why they started eating each other, it's why they never stopped. But the Atapuerca caves hold an even darker secret about what drove them to such extremes. You're standing on a glacier that stretches beyond the horizon, watching the last of the Neanderthals freeze to death. It's 115,000 years ago, and the worm glaciation has just begun an ice age so severe it will lock Europe in permafrost for the next 100,000 years. The temperature has dropped 12 degrees Celsius in just a few decades, and everything you thought you knew about survival is now useless. The Neanderthals around you are dying not from the cold, but from starvation. The advancing ice has destroyed their familiar forests, driven away the large game they depended on, and turned their world into a frozen wasteland. But here's what's truly disturbing. They're too specialized to adapt. After 400,000 years of evolution, they've become biological perfection for a world that no longer exists. You watch as a Neanderthal family huddles in a cave near what is now France. The father's muscles are massive, 30% larger than a modern. Humans perfectly designed for hunting mammoth and rhinoceros with heavy spears. His brain is actually bigger than yours, with a cranial capacity of 1,600 cubic centimeters. Compared to your 1,400, his bones are so thick and dense they could stop a bullet. But all of this evolutionary perfection means nothing against the advancing ice. The family hasn't eaten meat in 6 days. The children's ribs are showing through their thick skin. The mother died yesterday, and her body lies frozen in the corner of the cave. The father knows he should butcher her for food. Neanderthals practice cannibalism regularly, but something in his large, complex brain refuses to let him cross that final line with his mate. Archaeological evidence from sites like El Sidrón in Spain reveals the horrifying math of Neanderthal survival. A single adult male needed 4,000 to 5,000 calories per day to maintain his massive muscle mass, compared to the 2,000 to 2,500 calories required by the smaller, more efficient Homo sapiens. In a world of abundance, Neanderthals were apex predators. In a world of scarcity, they were evolutionary dead ends. You're witnessing the slow extinction of an entire human species, not through war or disease, but through the cruelest twist of evolution, becoming too perfect for a changing world. But as the last Neanderthals die, another group of humans is making choices that will haunt our species forever. You're standing on a glacier that stretches beyond the horizon, watching the last of the Neanderthals freeze to death. It's 115,000 years ago, and the worm glaciation has just begun an ice age so severe it will lock Europe in permafrost for the next 100,000 years. The temperature has dropped 12 degrees Celsius in just a few decades, and everything you thought you knew about survival is now useless. The Neanderthals around you are dying not from the cold, but from starvation. The advancing ice has destroyed their familiar forests, driven away the large game they depended on, and turned their world into a frozen wasteland. But here's what's truly disturbing. They're too specialized to adapt. After 400,000 years of evolution, they've become biological perfection for a world that no longer exists. You watch as a Neanderthal family huddles in a cave near what is now France. The father's muscles are massive, 30% larger than a modern. Humans perfectly designed for hunting mammoth and rhinoceros with heavy spears. His brain is actually bigger than yours, with a cranial capacity of 1,600 cubic centimeters. Compared to your 1,400, his bones are so thick and dense they could stop a bullet. But all of this evolutionary perfection means nothing against the advancing ice. The family hasn't eaten meat in 6 days. The children's ribs are showing through their thick skin. The mother died yesterday, and her body lies frozen in the corner of the cave. The father knows he should butcher her for food. Neanderthals practice cannibalism regularly, but something in his large, complex brain refuses to let him cross that final line with his mate. Archaeological evidence from sites like El Sidron in Spain reveals the horrifying math of Neanderthal survival. A single adult male needed 4,000 to 5,000 calories per day to maintain his massive muscle mass, compared to the 2,000 to 2,500 calories required by the smaller, more efficient Homo sapiens. In a world of abundance, Neanderthals were apex predators. In a world of scarcity, they were evolutionary dead ends. You're witnessing the slow extinction of an entire human species, not through war or disease, but through the cruelest twist of evolution, becoming too perfect for a changing world. But as the last Neanderthals die, another group of humans is making choices that will haunt our species forever. You're standing in Chauvet Cave in southern France, 32,000 years ago, holding a torch that illuminates humanity's first masterpiece. The cave walls come alive with galloping horses, charging rhinos, and prowling cave lions. Artwork so sophisticated it rivals anything created in the Renaissance. But hidden among these beautiful images is something that will disturb you. The world's first artistic depiction of murder. Your Cro-Magnon ancestors didn't just paint animals for decoration. They painted them to cast spells, to capture their souls, to control their fate. And in the dark corner of the cave, barely visible in your flickering torchlight, you find what appears to be a human figure pierced by spears. This isn't abstract art. It's a hunting manual for killing people. The artist who created this image used techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered for 30,000 years. They mixed pigments from manganese oxide and iron ochre, creating colors that have remained vibrant for millennia. They understood perspective, showing animals in three-dimensional space. They even used the natural contours of the cave wall to give their paintings depth and movement. But they also understood something darker, that art could be weaponized. Carbon dating reveals that humans visited Chauvet Cave for over 5,000 years. Adding new paintings layer by layer, each generation left its mark, but they also left evidence of increasing violence. Later paintings show more weapons, more scenes of conflict, more human figures in positions of death. Art wasn't just evolving. It was becoming a tool for psychological warfare. You find handprints pressed against the cave wall, but many are missing fingers. At first, archaeologists thought these were ritual amputations, but new evidence suggests something more disturbing. These handprints were made by torture victims, people who had their fingers cut off as warnings to others. The cave wasn't just an art gallery. It was a torture chamber where victims were forced to leave their mark in blood and pain. The person who painted the pierced human figure wasn't just an artist. They were planning a murder, and somewhere, in the darkness beyond your torchlight, the evidence of that murder waits to be discovered. But this was only the beginning of humanity's artistic obsession with death. You're 26,000 years ago in what is now the Czech Republic, standing over the body of a severely disabled child who was just burned alive as an offering to gods that don't exist. This is Dolní Věstonice, one of the oldest permanent settlements in human history. And you've just witnessed humanity's first organized religion built entirely around the systematic murder of children. The child at your feet was born with spina bifida, a condition that left them unable to walk or contribute to the tribe's survival in the brutal calculus of Ice Age existence. Disabled children were liabilities that consumed resources without providing benefit. But rather than simply abandoning them to die, your ancestors developed something far more sinister. They convinced themselves that killing these children was sacred. The archaeological evidence is undeniable. At least 12 children's bodies have been found in ritual contexts at Dolní Věstonice, all showing signs of deliberate execution. Some were strangled with sinew cords. Others were clubbed to death with mammoth bones. The youngest was barely 2 years old, her skull caved in by multiple blows from a stone axe. Each body was then burned on specially constructed altars made from mammoth bones and clay. Dr. Jiri Svoboda, who excavated the site, found that these weren't random acts of violence. They were elaborate ceremonies that could last for days. The children were kept alive and displayed to the entire tribe before their execution. Family members participated willingly, believing they were sending their loved ones to intercede with supernatural forces. The murders were followed by feasts where the tribe consumed mammoth meat cooked over the same fires that burned the children. You're holding a clay figurine found at the site, the famous Venus of Dolmi Vestanis, one of humanity's earliest works of art. But this isn't the fertility goddess or symbol of abundance. Recent analysis reveals it was made with cremated human bone ash, likely from one of the sacrificed children. Your ancestors literally incorporated their victims into their art, creating idols from the very people they murdered. The settlement thrived for over 1,000 years, becoming one of the most sophisticated communities of the Upper Paleolithic. They developed advanced hunting techniques, created complex tools, and built permanent structures that could house dozens of families. But all of this progress was built on a foundation of ritualized child murder that they convinced themselves was holy. Standing in this ancient killing ground, you realize that organized religion didn't begin with worship, it began with murder. But the truly disturbing part isn't what they did to these children. It's how they made peace with themselves afterward. You're trapped inside a house made entirely from the bones of dead giants, and the walls are closing in. It's 15,000 years ago in what is now Ukraine, and you're experiencing humanity's most disturbing architectural achievement. Homes built from the skeletons of hundreds of woolly mammoths. But these aren't just shelters, they're monuments to extinction that your ancestors built while driving an entire species to annihilation. The structure around you required the bones of at least 95 mammoths to construct. Femurs serve as support beams, ribs form the curved walls, and skulls create the foundation. Tusks, some over 10 feet long, are arranged in geometric patterns that serve no structural purpose. They're purely decorative, a celebration of slaughter. The entire house weighs over 20 tons, a tomb made from creatures that once ruled the Ice Age. But here's what will haunt you. These mammoths weren't killed for food or clothing. Analysis of the bones reveals that most of the meat was left to rot, and the hides were never processed. Your ancestors killed these magnificent creatures for one reason only: to steal their bones for construction. They committed genocide for the sake of architecture. Dr. Mikhail Gladkik, who excavated the Mazirik site, found evidence of systematic mammoth hunting that spanned centuries. The bone houses required constant maintenance and expansion, meaning new mammoths had to be killed regularly. A single family dwelling needed to be remodeled every few years, requiring fresh bones to replace those damaged by weather and time. Each renovation meant more mammoth deaths. The construction process itself was ritualistic. Bones were arranged in specific patterns that match astronomical alignments, suggesting your ancestors believed they were building temples, not homes. Children's toys made from mammoth ivory were buried in the foundations, along with human skulls. That shows signs of violent death. These weren't just houses. They were altars where the line between shelter and sacrifice became meaninglessly blurred. You can feel the weight of extinction pressing down on you through these bone walls. The mammoth population in this region went from thousands to zero in just a few centuries. Driven extinct by humans who turned their skeletons into real estate, the last mammoth died knowing its bones would become someone's living room. As you sit in this monument to ecological destruction, you realize that humanity's relationship with extinction began long before the modern age. But outside these bone walls, an even darker chapter of the Stone Age is just beginning. You're witnessing the moment humanity invented systematic sexual violence as a tool of control. And it's 12,000 years ago in the Nachafian settlements of the Levant. This is where your ancestors first abandoned their nomadic lifestyle to build permanent villages. But with settlement came a horrifying innovation: the institutionalized sexual enslavement of women captured from neighboring tribes. The evidence is written in bones found at sites like Ain Malaha and Jericho. Female skeletons show patterns of trauma that forensic anthropologists recognize immediately. Healed fractures to the forearms from defensive wounds, damage to the pelvis from repeated sexual assault, and malnutrition patterns indicating these women were fed less than the men who held them captive. The most disturbing are the restraint marks, grooves worn into wrist and ankle bones from being tied up for extended periods. Dr. Natalie Monroe from the University of Connecticut discovered that up to 30% of adult female remains at Nachafian sites show evidence of violence and captivity. These women came from different genetic populations, proving they were taken from distant tribes during raids. They were marched hundreds of miles from their homes, bound and brutalized, then forced into lives of sexual servitude that typically lasted only a few years before they died from their injuries. The Nachafian settlements weren't just humanity's first permanent towns. They were humanity's first rape camps. Men would organize hunting parties that targeted other villages specifically to capture women. These raids became so common that entire regions were depopulated of females, creating a vicious cycle where communities had to raid even farther to find victims. You're standing in a house where a captured woman lived and died. She was around 16 when she was taken, and the bone analysis shows she gave birth to at least 4 children before dying at age 23. Her remains were found chained to a wall with copper restraints, her legs broken and never properly healed. Probably to prevent escape attempts, her children were buried nearby, all showing signs of malnutrition and abuse. The most chilling part isn't the physical evidence, it's the cultural evidence. Nachafian art and ritual objects celebrate the capture and domination of women. Stone carvings show bound females in explicitly sexual positions. Ceremonial tools are decorated with images of rape and violence. Your ancestors didn't just practice sexual slavery, they were proud of it. This was the birth of patriarchy, written in broken bones and shallow graves. But as disturbing as this systematic violence was, it pales in comparison to what your ancestors were planning for their own children. You're holding a newborn baby above a pool of black water, and in 10 seconds, you're going to drop them to their death. It's 10,000 years ago in what is now Denmark, and you're participating in humanity's most widespread religious practice. Infant sacrifice by drowning. The bog below you has already claimed 847 children. Their tiny bodies preserved in the acidic water for millennia, eternal witnesses to a horror your ancestors called holy. The Talon man might be the most famous bog body, but he was just one victim among thousands. Children made up the majority of bog sacrifices across northern Europe, their deaths more ritualized and brutal than adult executions. The baby in your arms has been fed a last meal of barley porridge mixed with ergot-infected grain, a hallucinogenic fungus that will cause terrifying visions as they drown. Your ancestors believed the screaming was music to the gods. Dr. P. V. Glob, who studied bog bodies for over 40 years, found that infant sacrifices followed seasonal patterns tied to agricultural cycles. Spring drownings were meant to ensure good harvests, summer sacrifices to prevent drought, autumn murders to guarantee successful hunts, and winter executions to make the sun return. Your ancestors had systematized child murder into a calendar of horror that governed their entire year. The preservation in the bogs means you can see everything. The rope burns around tiny necks, the puncture wounds from sacrificial knives, the expressions of terror frozen on infant faces. Some children were as young as 6 months old, others as old as 12. All show signs of prolonged torture before death: broken fingers, burned skin, gouged eyes. The drowning was just the final act in ceremonies that could last for weeks. You're part of a community that has convinced itself these murders are necessary for survival. The priest-shamans who wielded stone knives and wore masks made from human skulls taught that the gods demanded innocent blood. The younger and more helpless the victim, the more powerful the sacrifice. Newborns were the most valuable offerings because their screams were believed to carry prayers directly to the supernatural realm. The bog water is already closing over the baby's face. In your mind, you can still hear the splash. See the tiny hand reaching upward one last time before disappearing into the black depths. Around you, hundreds of adults chant and celebrate, convinced they've just guaranteed another year of prosperity through murder. This wasn't primitive ignorance. It was sophisticated theology. Your ancestors created entire philosophical systems to justify drowning their own children. But even this systematic infanticide couldn't prepare them for the horror that was coming with the invention of agriculture. You're starving to death in the world's first city, surrounded by more food than your nomadic ancestors could have imagined. But you'll never be allowed to eat it. It's 9,500 years ago in Catalayı, Turkey, and you've just witnessed humanity's greatest mistake, the agricultural revolution that turned free hunter-gatherers into slaves of grain. The wheat you planted to liberate yourself has instead become your master, and there's no escape. The transition to farming wasn't gradual. It was catastrophic. Skeletal remains from Catalayı show that the first farmers were significantly shorter, weaker, and sicker than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Adult height dropped by 6 inches, bone density decreased by 30%, tooth decay increased by 400%. The supposed dawn of civilization was actually the dawn of malnutrition, disease, and premature death. Dr. James C. Scott's research reveals the brutal mathematics of early agriculture. Hunter-gatherers worked about 15 hours per week to meet all their needs and had diets containing over 150 different plant and animal species. Early farmers worked 60 to 80 hours per week and survived on perhaps 3 to 4 different crops. When those crops failed, which happened regularly, entire populations starved. The security of farming was an illusion bought with freedom and health. You're living in a society that has 8,000 residents crammed into a space smaller than a modern city block. The houses are built on top of each other in a maze-like structure with no streets, no doors, and no privacy. You enter your home through a hole in the roof and climb down a ladder into a single room where your entire family lives, works, sleeps, and dies. The air is thick with smoke from cooking fires and human waste, creating respiratory diseases that kill half of all children before age 5. But the most disturbing part isn't the living conditions, it's the psychological transformation. Hunter-gatherers made decisions collectively and could leave their groups whenever they wanted. Farmers became trapped by their crops, forced to stay in one place, subject to the authority of grain priests who controlled the harvest. You've traded independence for bread, and the bread is killing you. The walls of your house are covered with paintings that tell the story of this transformation. Earlier artworks show humans dancing with animals, hunting together as equals. Later paintings show humans kneeling before anthropomorphic grain stalks, worshipping the very plants that have enslaved them. Your ancestors didn't domesticate wheat. Domesticated them? You're living through humanity's first ecological disaster, created not by climate change or natural catastrophe, but by your own success. But this was just the beginning of agriculture's dark side. You're dying in humanity's first systematic war, and it's been going on for 3,000 years with no end in sight. It's 7,000 years ago, along the Danube River in Central Europe, and you're witnessing the Liner-Bankeremic culture's endless cycle of violence, a conflict so persistent and brutal but entire regions were depopulated. Their inhabitants slaughtered in massacres that make modern genocide look modest by comparison. The LBK were Europe's first farmers, peaceful people who created beautiful pottery and cultivated crops in small, harmonious villages. At least, that's what archaeologists believed until they started counting the bodies. Mass graves across Germany, Austria, and Hungary reveal a different story. These peaceful farmers were locked in perpetual warfare that consumed entire generations and left landscapes littered with the bones of the massacred. At Talheim, Germany, archaeologists found 34 bodies thrown into a pit bin, women and children killed with stone axes and wooden clubs. At Aspern, Schletz in Austria, the remains of at least 67 people were discovered, showing signs of systematic torture before execution. The victims' skulls were smashed open, their long bones cracked for marrow, their bodies left unburied as food for scavengers. This wasn't war, it was extermination. Dr. Christian Meyer's analysis of LBK massacre sites reveals patterns that chill modern researchers. The killings targeted entire communities, leaving no survivors. Children as young as 2 years old were executed with the same brutality as adults. Pregnant women were killed with special cruelty, their unborn children cut from their wombs and smashed against rocks. The goal wasn't conquest or resource acquisition, it was the complete elimination of rival populations. You're part of a culture that has normalized genocide. Every spring, young men organize raiding parties to attack neighboring villages. The raids follow seasonal patterns, timed to coincide with planting and harvest seasons when communities are most vulnerable. Success is measured not by plunder taken, but by enemies killed. Warriors who return without blood on their weapons are exiled as cowards. The warfare isn't driven by scarcity. LBK territories had abundant fertile land and water. It's driven by something darker, the psychological need to maintain group identity through violence against outsiders. Your ancestors discovered that nothing bonds a community together like shared participation in murder. Killing your neighbors became a sacrament that defined what it meant to be human. You're bleeding out from a stone axe wound to your skull, watching your village burn and your family being butchered by farmers who look exactly like you, speak the same language, and worship the same gods. The only difference is that they lived 20 miles away and in the Stone Age. That was enough reason for extinction. But even this endless cycle of massacre couldn't prepare your species for the horror they were about to unleash with their first metal tools. You're holding humanity's first metal weapon, and it's still dripping with blood from your neighbor's throat. It's 5,300 years ago in the Alps, and you just committed murder with a copper axe. The same type of weapon found buried with C, the Iceman, whose mummified corpse would be discovered 5,000 years later with an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder blade. The Copper Age hasn't brought peace or prosperity. It's unleashed a new era of violence that makes stone tools look like toys. The copper axe in your hands required months of work to create. First, miners risked their lives descending into shafts hundreds of feet deep, breathing toxic fumes and facing constant cave-ins. Then, smelters worked at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, often dying from lead poisoning or burns. Finally, smiths hammered the raw metal into shape, creating weapons that could slice through bone like butter. All of this technology, all of this innovation, all of this human ingenuity dedicated to making killing more efficient. Tsi himself was probably a victim of the violence that defined his era. The arrowhead in his back was made from the finest flint, designed to cause maximum damage. His left hand showed defensive wounds where he tried to block his attacker's blade. His copper axe was still sharp when found, suggesting he died in the middle of a fight. But most disturbing was the tattoo on his wrist, a mark that archaeologists now believe identified him as a professional killer. Dr. Albert Zink's analysis of Copper Age burial sites reveals a society obsessed with violent death. Weapons make up 60% of all grave goods, compared to less than 10% in Neolithic burials. Mass graves become common, filled with bodies showing evidence of systematic execution. Children's skeletons bear cut marks indicating they were murdered, alongside their parents in family annihilation events that wiped out entire bloodlines. You are living in the world's first arms race. Villages compete to create deadlier weapons, more effective armor, better fortifications. The technology develops faster than social systems can adapt, creating a world where anyone with access to copper becomes a potential tyrant. The equality of the Stone Age, where strength and skill mattered more than possessions, dies with the first metal blade. The man whose throat you just cut was your cousin. His crime was owning a copper dagger sharper than yours in the Copper Age. Weapons inequality meant survival inequality, and your ancestors chose murder over sharing. The blood on your axe isn't just from one victim, it's from the death of humanity's egalitarian past. C died alone on a mountain pass, but he wasn't unique. Thousands like him were murdered during the Copper Age transition, casualties of humanity's first technological revolution. But their deaths were just a rehearsal for the true horror that would arrive with bronze. You're watching the last stone tool maker in Europe put down his napping stone forever, and with it dies 3 million years of human tradition. It's 4,500 years ago in what is now Scotland, and bronze weapons have just arrived from the continent, making every flint knife and obsidian spear obsolete overnight. The Stone Age isn't ending gradually, it's being murdered by metal, and you're witnessing the death of the only way of life our species has ever known. The old toolmaker's hands are scarred from decades of stone knapping, his fingertips worn smooth from shaping flint into perfect arrowheads. He learned the craft from his grandfather, who learned it from his grandfather in an unbroken chain, stretching back to the first humans who picked up rocks and saw potential weapons. Now his knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of millions of years, will die with him, because bronze makes everything he knows worthless. Archaeological evidence from sites like Skara Brae in the Orkney Islands shows the traumatic speed of this transition. Stone Age villages that had thrived for thousands of years were abandoned within a single generation, not destroyed by war or natural disaster, but simply left empty as their inhabitants fled to trade centers where metal weapons could be obtained. The traditional way of life became a death sentence for those who clung to it. Dr. Stuart Needham's research reveals that the Bronze Age didn't arrive through gradual cultural exchange. It was imposed through violence. Bronze-wielding warriors from Central Europe swept across the continent, exterminating Stone Age populations who couldn't defend themselves with flint against metal. Mass graves from this period show the one-sided nature of these conflicts. Bronze weapons left clean cuts through bone, while stone weapons shattered uselessly against bronze armor. You're part of the last generation that remembers when humans lived as equals, when survival depended on skill and cooperation, rather than access to rare metals controlled by distant elites. The Bronze Age brings with it something the Stone Age never knew: permanent class division. Those who control tin and copper mines become kings. Those who don't become slaves. The toolmaker's final creation is a perfect laurel leaf point, as beautiful and functional as any made in the past million years. But it's also an antique, a museum piece, a relic of humanity's childhood. Tomorrow, bronze-armed invaders will arrive at his village, and his masterpiece will be crushed under their metal boots. The Stone Age dies not with a whimper, but with the screams of those who tried to defend it with tools that were suddenly, tragically obsolete. As you hold that last stone tool, you realize you're touching the end of an era that defined what it meant to be human. But the true tragedy isn't the death of stone tools. It's what we became when we replaced them with metal. You are listening to the final words of humanity's last living library, and when she dies tonight, 3 million years of accumulated knowledge will die with her. It's 4,000 years ago in what is now Ireland, and you're sitting beside a Stone Age grandmother whose mind contains the entire oral history of her people hunting techniques, medicinal plants, seasonal patterns, survival strategies, and stories that stretch back to the Ice Ages. But the Bronze Age scribes have arrived with their clay tablets, declaring her knowledge primitive and worthless. Her name has been lost to history, but her skull was found in a bog near Newgrange, showing the distinctive wear patterns of someone who lived to extreme old age in the Stone Age, perhaps 70 or 80 years. Ancient by prehistoric standards, her teeth are worn down to nubs from a lifetime of chewing plant fibers to make rope. Her finger bones show the repetitive stress marks of someone who spent decades knapping flint. She is the living embodiment of Stone Age wisdom, and she's dying alone. The knowledge in her head represents millions of hours of accumulated learning. She knows which mushrooms cure infection and which ones cause hallucinations. She can predict weather patterns by watching bird migration. She understands the healing properties of over 300 different plants. She can track animals by scent alone and navigate by star patterns invisible to modern eyes. All of this information, the result of countless generations of trial and error, will vanish when her heart stops beating. Dr. Lynn Kelly's research into oral cultures reveals what we lost when literacy replaced human memory. Stone Age people could memorize the locations of thousands of edible plants across vast territories. They knew the behavioral patterns of dozens of animal species. They understood seasonal changes with astronomical precision. Their minds were living encyclopedias that made modern survival guides look like children's picture books. But the Bronze Age brings writing, and with writing comes the belief that human memory is unreliable and primitive. The scribes dismiss her knowledge as old wives' tales and primitive superstition. They're more interested in recording bronze recipes and tax collections than preserving the wisdom that kept humanity alive for 3 million years. Progress means forgetting the past. She tries to teach the young people, but they're fascinated by bronze tools and writing tablets. They don't want to memorize plant locations when they can trade for grain. They don't need to track animals when they can domesticate cattle. Her wisdom seems irrelevant in a world where metal and agriculture have replaced the ancient survival skills. As her breathing becomes labored, you realize you're witnessing the death of more than one person. You're watching the end of humanity's direct connection to the natural world. When she dies, we become dependent on tools instead of knowledge, on technology instead of wisdom. Her final words are a warning that won't be heeded for another 4,000 years. You're tracking the final mammoth in Europe, and you know that when you kill it, you'll be ending a relationship between humans and megafauna that stretches back 3 million years. It's 3,700 years ago on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean. And this lone woolly mammoth is the last survivor of a species that once numbered in the millions. Your bronze-tipped spear will write the final sentence in the longest story ever told. The coexistence of humans and giants. The mammoth before you is smaller than its mainland ancestors, a victim of island dwarfism that reduced its height from 11 feet to just 6 feet at the shoulder. But it's still magnificent, still a living connection to the Pleistocene epoch when megafauna ruled the earth. Its ancestors survived the Ice Ages, volcanic eruptions, and climate changes that killed the dinosaurs. Only one thing could drive them to extinction: human ingenuity applied to systematic slaughter. Dr. Sergei Vartanyan's research on Wrangel Island reveals the mammoth's final chapter. The population had shrunk to perhaps 500 to 1,000 individuals, isolated on an island that was becoming smaller as sea levels rose. Genetic analysis shows these last mammoths were severely inbred, plagued by genetic diseases that made them vulnerable to even minor environmental changes. They were already doomed when the first humans arrived with bronze weapons. But you're not hunting this mammoth for survival, you're hunting it for sport. Your Bronze Age culture has domesticated cattle, pigs, and sheep. You have abundant food sources that don't require tracking megafauna across frozen wastelands. The mammoth hunt has become a ritual, a way for warriors to prove their courage by killing something legendary. The last mammoth will die not from necessity, but from human vanity. The hunt itself is anticlimactic. The mammoth, weakened by generations of inbreeding and island isolation, can barely defend itself against your bronze weapons and organized tactics. What would have been an epic struggle between your Stone Age ancestors and healthy mainland mammoths is now just an execution. The Age of Giants is ending not with a roar, but with a whimper as the mammoth falls. You're ending more than one life. You're severing humanity's last connection to the megafauna world that shaped our evolution. For 3 million years, humans lived alongside giant mammoths, cave bears, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths. These creatures were our teachers, our competitors, our inspiration for art and religion. Now only their bones remain, and soon even those will be forgotten. The mammoth's death marks the end of the Quaternary extinction event, the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history, and the first caused entirely by a single species, us. Over the past 50,000 years, humans have eliminated 83% of wild mammals, 80% of marine mammals, and 50% of plants. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. It ended because we ran out of animals large enough to justify hunting with them. But killing the last mammoth reveals an even darker truth about what we've become. You're watching Stone Age childhood die, and it's happening in the copper mines beneath the Alps where 5-year-old children work. 16-hour shifts extracting the metal that will end their world forever. It's 3,500 years ago, and the Bronze Age has just discovered its most efficient miners. Small hands that can reach into crevices adults cannot access. Backed by bodies too young to understand they're being worked to death. The child beside you in the mine shaft is perhaps 7 years old. Her lungs already black with copper dust. Her growth stunted by malnutrition and constant labor. She's never played a game, never heard a story, never learned to swim or climb trees, or do any of the things that define Stone Age childhood. Instead, she spends her brief life crawling through tunnels barely 2 feet high, breathing toxic fumes that will kill her before she reaches puberty. Archaeological evidence from Bronze Age mining sites reveals the systematic exploitation of children that made the metal revolution possible. At the Great Orme Mine in Wales, researchers found the remains of children as young as 4 buried in collapsed tunnels. Their bones showed the distinctive deformities of chronic malnutrition and repetitive stress injuries. Their teeth contained copper deposits that proved they were breathing metal dust from infancy. Dr. Alan Williams' analysis of Bronze Age child burials shows a dramatic change in how societies viewed their young. Stone Age children were buried with toys, jewelry, and food for the afterlife, suggesting they were valued members of the community. Bronze Age children were buried with mining tools and work-related injuries, treated as economic units rather than human beings. Childhood itself became a commodity to be exploited. The girl working beside you will be dead within 2 years. Her body discarded in a mine shaft like the hundreds of others who preceded her. She doesn't know that her short, brutal life is making possible the bronze weapons that will destroy Stone Age communities across Europe. She's just trying to fill her daily quota of copper ore so she won't be beaten tonight. You're witnessing the birth of industrial child labor, the moment when human societies decided that technological progress was worth sacrificing their children's lives. The Stone Age never used children as mining equipment. That innovation belonged entirely to the Bronze Age, setting a precedent that would echo through history. The copper this child extracts will be forged into weapons that will kill Stone Age. Families who still believe children should play in meadows rather than die in mines. But the true horror isn't what's happening to her body. It's what's happening to her mind. You're experiencing humanity's first drug epidemic, and it's destroying what remains of Stone Age culture with pharmaceutical precision. It's 3,200 years ago in Central Asia, and you're consuming fermented Mare's milk laced with cannabis and opium poppies cocktail the Bronze Age shamans have perfected to create religious experiences so intense they're literally addictive. The Stone Age used plant medicines to heal. The Bronze Age uses them to control. The drink in your hands contains enough psychoactive compounds to keep you hallucinating for 3 days straight. Unlike the careful, ritualized use of psychedelics in Stone Age ceremonies, Bronze Age drug use is about overwhelming the senses, breaking down individual identity, and creating psychological dependence on the shamanic class that controls the supply. You're not expanding consciousness. You're destroying it, Dr. Barber and Barber's research on Bronze Age textiles reveals that poppy and cannabis cultivation had become industrial scale operations by 3000 BCE. Entire valleys were converted to drug production, tended by specialized farmers who knew precisely how to maximize psychoactive compounds. The Scythians and other steppe peoples built their entire economy around producing mind-altering substances. For trade and political control, the archaeological evidence is sobering. Bronze Age burial sites contain drug paraphernalia at rates 400%, higher than Stone Age sites. But these aren't ceremonial objects. They're the tools of addiction. Specialized pipes for smoking cannabis, vessels designed for concentrated poppy extracts, and bronze needles that appear to have been used for injection. Your ancestors discovered not just how to alter consciousness, but how to hijack it permanently. You're part of a culture that has weaponized intoxication. Bronze Age rulers discovered that drugged populations are compliant populations. Keep people high enough, and they won't question why their children are dying in copper mines. Give them powerful enough hallucinogens, and they'll believe that sacrifice and slavery are divine commands. The drugs aren't liberation, they're chains made of chemistry. The Stone Age used plant medicines to connect with nature and heal trauma. The Bronze Age uses them to disconnect people from reality and create trauma. You're drinking liquid oblivion, and with each sip, you're forgetting the wisdom your ancestors spent 3 million years accumulating. The drugs make the transition from Stone Age freedom to Bronze Age slavery feel like a religious experience instead of cultural suicide. As the hallucinogens take hold, you realize you're experiencing more than intoxication. You're experiencing the chemical death of human independence. But even chemical slavery couldn't prepare your species for the psychological warfare that was coming. You're prostrating yourself before humanity's first divine dictator, and the smell of burning children fills the air around his bronze throne. It's 2,800 years ago in what is now Iraq, and you're witnessing the birth of absolute monarchy, a system of government that the Stone Age never knew because it never needed kings when everyone was equal. But the Bronze Age has created something unprecedented. Humans who claim to be gods and back up that claim with industrial-scale violence. The king before you isn't just a political leader. He's a psychological weapon designed to break the human spirit. His crown is made from the skulls of rival chiefs. His throne sits atop a pyramid of severed heads. And his royal garments are dyed with blood from sacrificial victims. This isn't primitive barbarism, it's sophisticated terror, carefully calculated to make resistance seem impossible through sheer psychological overwhelming. The transformation from Stone Age egalitarianism to Bronze Age autocracy required more than just metal weapons. It required convincing people that some humans were fundamentally different from others. The God-King system achieved this through systematic dehumanization that made slavery feel natural. If the king is divine, then everyone else is subhuman by comparison. If the king speaks for the gods, then disobeying him is cosmic blasphemy. Dr. Norman Yoffe's analysis of early state formation reveals how Bronze Age rulers used coordinated terror to destroy tribal loyalties. Mass executions weren't random violence. They were carefully choreographed performances designed to demonstrate absolute power. Entire families would be tortured to death in public ceremonies that could last for days, their screams serving as both entertainment and education for the watching crowds. You're part of the audience at one of these execution festivals, forced to watch as the king's soldiers slowly dismember a family whose only crime was possessing bronze tools without royal permission. The parents are killed last, after being forced to watch their children burned alive. The message is clear. The king owns not just your labor and your property, but your right to exist. The Bronze Age didn't just create social inequality. It created the psychological infrastructure to make inequality feel inevitable. Stone Age humans couldn't imagine one person owning another because they lived in societies where everyone had equal access to survival resources. Bronze Age humans were trained from birth to believe that some people were born to rule and others were born to serve. As you grovel in the dirt before this blood-soaked throne, you realize you're witnessing more than political theater. You're seeing the death of human dignity itself. But even divine kingship couldn't prepare humanity for the final horror that would end the Stone Age forever. You're holding the weapon that will end the Stone Age forever, and it's still warm from the forge that birthed humanity's darkest age. It's 2,500 years ago, and the iron sword in your hands represents more than technological advancement. It's a death sentence for every culture that still believes in the Stone Age values of equality, cooperation, and respect for nature. Iron doesn't just cut through bronze. It cuts through the soul of human civilization. Iron weapons are democratic in the most terrifying way possible. Unlike bronze, which required rare tin and copper controlled by distant elites, iron ore exists everywhere. Any village blacksmith can forge weapons that rival those of kings. But this democratization of violence doesn't create equality. It creates chaos. When everyone can make killing tools, everyone becomes a potential tyrant, and the last restraints on human brutality collapse completely. The archaeological record shows what happened when iron weapons spread across the ancient world. The late Bronze Age collapse wasn't caused by natural disasters or foreign invasions. It was caused by iron-armed populations that suddenly had the power to destroy civilizations that had taken centuries to build. Within 200 years, every major Bronze Age kingdom from Greece to Mesopotamia lay in ruins, their cities burned by iron-wielding raiders who emerged from nowhere to reshape the world through violence. Dr. Eric Klein's research reveals that the Bronze Age collapse was actually the Stone Age's final revenge. Many of the iron-armed groups that destroyed Bronze Age civilizations were descended from Stone Age populations that had been enslaved or marginalized by metal-using elites. The Dorians who destroyed Mycenaean Greece, the Israelites who conquered Canaan, the various sea peoples who devastated the Eastern Mediterranean, all were groups that had maintained Stone Age cultural values while acquiring Iron Age weapons. But this wasn't liberation. It was mutual annihilation. The iron-armed destroyers didn't restore Stone Age egalitarianism. They created something far worse than Bronze Age tyranny. Iron Age societies combined the technological power of metal with the tribal brutalities of the Stone Age, creating cultures that were simultaneously more advanced and more savage than anything that came before. You're part of this iron revolution. But as you look at the sword in your hands, you realize it's not just a weapon. It's a mirror reflecting what humanity has become. The blade is sharp enough to cut through bone, but not sharp enough to cut through the cycle of violence that has consumed your species for the past 1,000,000 years. The Stone Age promised survival through cooperation. The Bronze Age promised prosperity through hierarchy. The Iron Age promises only death through democracy of destruction. As you grip the iron sword, you're not just holding humanity's future, you're holding its damnation. But there's one final chapter to this story. One last horror that will complete the transformation from Stone Age innocence to Iron Age despair. You're watching the final Stone Age humans on Earth prepare for their extinction, and they know exactly what's coming. It's 2,200 years ago on a remote island in the Pacific, and you're among the last people on the planet who still live as your ancestors did 3 million years ago. But iron ships have appeared on the horizon, carrying diseases, weapons, and ideas that will end your way of life within a single generation. The tribe around you numbers fewer than 200 people, the remnant of a population that once spread across the entire Pacific. They've survived this long by remaining isolated, avoiding contact with the metal-using civilizations that have consumed the rest of the world. But isolation can't protect them anymore. The Iron Age has developed navigation technology sophisticated enough to reach any corner of Earth, and nowhere is far enough away to escape the expansion of metal-based civilization. These last Stone Age people aren't primitive. They're highly sophisticated survivors who've maintained technologies and knowledge that metal-using societies have forgotten. They can navigate across thousands of miles of open ocean using only star patterns and wave movements. They know the medicinal properties of thousands of plants. They've developed sustainable hunting and gathering practices that could support their population indefinitely without environmental damage. Dr. Peter Bellwood's research on Pacific Island populations reveals what made these final Stone Age societies so resilient. Unlike mainland cultures that became dependent on agriculture and metal tools, island populations maintained the flexibility and self-reliance that had kept humanity alive for millions of years. They were, in many ways, more advanced than the iron-using civilizations that would destroy them. Their advancement just moved in a different direction. But advancement can't protect them from what the iron ships carry: smallpox, measles, influenza, and other diseases that will kill 90% of the population within decades. The survivors will be enslaved, their children forced to abandon Stone Age knowledge in favor of Metal Age servitude. Their languages will be forbidden, their religious practices outlawed, their traditional skills declared worthless. You're witnessing the end of humanity's childhood, the final moment when our species remembered how to live as part of nature rather than its master. These last Stone Age people represent 3 million years of accumulated wisdom about sustainable living, cooperative societies, and harmony with the natural world. All of that knowledge will die with them, taking with it humanity's last chance to remember what we were before we became what we are. As the iron ships land on the beach, you realize you're not just watching the death of a tribe. You're watching the death of an alternative future, a path our species might have taken if we'd made different choices 3 million years ago. The Stone Age doesn't end with the discovery of metal. It ends with the extinction of the last people who remembered that metal was a choice, not an inevitability. You're standing in a modern museum, looking at a Stone Age hand axe identical to the one you held 3 million years ago, and you're beginning to understand that the Stone Age never really ended. It just went underground, lurking in the darkest corners of human nature, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The same drives that made your ancestors crack skulls with volcanic rock now manifest in different forms. But the essential brutality remains unchanged. That first murder weapon from Olduvai Gorge sits behind bulletproof glass, labeled as humanity's earliest technology. But you know better now. You've seen the entire arc of the Stone Age, from those first deliberate killings to the final extinctions, and you understand that technology was never about making life better. It was about making death more efficient. The hand axe didn't liberate humanity from nature. It liberated humanity from humanity. Modern humans like to believe we've evolved beyond our Stone Age origins, but the evidence suggests otherwise. We still practice cannibalism. We just call it capitalism and consume each other economically. Instead of literally, we still sacrifice children to gods. We just call them market forces and national security. We still live in tribes that define themselves through violence against outsiders. We just call them nations and corporations. The Stone Age lasted 3 million years because it worked. Humans learned to survive in every environment on Earth, using nothing but stone, wood, and bone. They developed sustainable populations, egalitarian social structures, and ways of life that could have continued indefinitely without destroying the planet. The tragedy isn't that the Stone Age ended. It's that we replaced something that worked with systems guaranteed to fail. Dr. Jared Diamond's research suggests that the agricultural revolution, the event that ended the Stone Age, was the worst mistake in the history of the human race. Agriculture led to overpopulation, environmental destruction, social inequality, and the industrial civilization that now threatens the survival of every species on Earth. The Stone Age people we've spent 3 million years calling primitive may have been the only truly successful human societies our species ever created. Every modern crisis has Stone Age roots. Climate change echoes the megafauna extinctions that began 50,000 years ago. Political violence mirrors the tribal warfare that consumed the Neolithic. Economic inequality repeats the class systems that emerged with Bronze Age metallurgy. Nuclear weapons are just hand axes scaled up to global proportions. We never escaped. The Stone Age, we just gave it better tools. As you stare at that ancient hand axe, you realize you're looking at humanity's true face. Stripped of all the technological and cultural pretensions that disguise our essential nature, we are killer apes who learn to make better weapons. And every advance in civilization has been an advance in our capacity for sophisticated violence. The Stone Age ended, but the Stone Age mind endures, waiting in the darkness of human consciousness for its chance to crack open one more skull. The question isn't whether the Stone Age will return. It's whether humanity will survive its homecoming.